All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Mic'd Up Millionaires. This is episode number 6, and I have the legendary Jon Kepler on the podcast today. This is really exciting for me because I've been following Jon for a couple of years and really watching some of his moves and seeing him reap the benefits of a lot of the work that he's put into his real estate investing career and investments over the years. And honestly, the dude is just such an inspiration. Today, I kind of want to dive into his backstory with you guys and kind of share sort of a true, almost rags to riches story where we're going to see a really interesting transformation. And I recall being there throughout one of the periods of Jon's transformation. He was at my house, staying in my Airbnb that was a shared space with my girlfriend and I at the time. And he literally saw the dream house that you can see him sitting in today if you're watching this on YouTube. And honestly, I couldn't believe it. We looked at it, we saw it on the MLS, and Jon, I think, said to Alicia, his partner, hey, this is something we should maybe go look at. And then he showed me, and I was like, dude, you're gonna go look at that crazy, monstrous, awesome thing. So it's cool to be there throughout all that stuff. And welcome, Jon Kepler.
Thanks for having me. It's funny you brought that up. I remember that day quite clearly, and I remember that we woke up that morning, we were hanging out, and so I wanted to tell you what my plans were for the day, right? And so I showed you a picture of the house, and I said, so just so you know how I'm spending my afternoon, I'm going to go look at this place, but don't worry, there's no chance of a deal. It is not in our future. We're just having fun, and here we are.
You literally said that. You're like, there's no way we can buy this thing. Like, number one, it's absurdly priced, and number two, it's absurd. I think it's like 10,000 square feet or something.
It is, yeah.
It's a Goliath. I actually remember that as one of my fondest memories of you, Jon, because you were staying over. And if anybody knows Jon Kepler at all, maybe you're following on Instagram, which you should be, you'll know that Jon is literally always perfectly dressed. I'm talking the nicest suits, custom tailored, embroidered, everything. Hair's always perfect, even during COVID. And I got the opportunity to see Jon Kepler walk out of one of my bedrooms in nothing less than a 2-piece pajama set. And I was like, yes, he's not perfect. And then 3 seconds later, I saw the Brooks Brothers logo on it, and I sighed my way into the kitchen to make him some coffee because I was like, God damn it, even when he's dressed down, he's in Brooks Brothers. And that's when I realized.
Suit company, yeah.
and slippers. They had beautiful house shoes that I can't even call them slippers. Anyways, Jon, you dress impeccably. It's kind of ridiculous. So why don't you fill us in on your story? Because I too would love to retouch on this because I think it's actually an epic story.
Thank you. Well, in the beginning, I worked at Wendy's. I was, when did I start? I guess I was 16 when I started, but I really hated it. And I started up some little side businesses and did everything I could to get out of it. Finally joined a business. We'll see how deep we get on this. As long as it's entertaining, it's worth talking about. I joined an MLM where I was very briefly successful. I was quite successful for an extraordinarily short period of time, but just enough to get out of Wendy's. So I hated Wendy's. It was the worst. Getting out was the only goal. I was committed. And so I made it happen. And then after that, just kind of worked backwards, kind of struggled through some pivots in that primary business. And I knew real estate was the answer. I knew that I'd have to pivot my business over and over and over throughout my career unless I found something with stability, with underlying assets. And so after kind of working on that and trying to keep my head above water for a couple of years, bought my first apartment building and then kept going from there.
Yeah, that's wicked. And your first, your house, right? I think you guys went for like a pretty big jump as well, pretty big reach on your first property, and you kind of just made it work. So like, what inspired you to go that route instead of taking it small and playing it safe?
Well, I knew that it was the solution. The trick was just getting into it. This is years ago, right? So there were some American podcasts I would listen to, and they would basically pitch you on a type of deal you could do or a strategy. They'd cover the basics for free, and then they'd sell you a course at the end that was usually $9.99, so $1,000 at the end. And I found that if you just tuned into the same guy 2 or 3 times, he would give you a third of the tips the first time, the second third, the second time, the third, the third time. And so I could just piece it together, and basically I figured out my strategy slowly through a couple of years. I mean, because I couldn't buy, I had the time to learn. And so I just pieced it together until we finally pulled off our first deal.
That's awesome. How did you get the financing on the first deal?
Excellent question. A vendor take back. So,
Oh, perfect.
yes. So to be clear, I did buy my first house, and it did quite well. So it appraised for $48,000 more than I paid for it, perhaps just 2 years or so after I got it. But the first building was 6 apartments and a store. So purpose-built apartment building, not something smaller like a duplex conversion or a student house or something like that. So I had to do commercial financing. And so we asked for a vendor take back for $90,000 of the purchase price. Basically did the deal with bank first, a vendor take back second, and 10% down.
Yeah, that's wicked. Anybody listening that doesn't understand what a vendor take back is, it's essentially when you're just borrowing your seller's equity on a property, and then it gets registered against the property, just like a mortgage from the bank would. So you actually own and control the asset, but they own the debt. So it's not as if they retain ownership, they just have the debt on the property. So random side note for anybody listening that doesn't really know real estate, because I think there's some people on here that don't even know that this is a real estate kind of thing. I think I talk about this every single episode, but every single episode I have to say, this is not a goddamn real estate podcast. It's not another podcast where we talk about how do we get another duplex? What are the strategic renovations? All that noise that you see in a lot of the real estate podcasts. But I do think it's really fascinating, and I bring this up every episode as well, that every single person I've had on has a foundation in real estate investing. And it's cool that you mentioned that you knew that that was sort of the path, that was the goal. And I think an admirable trait there is you just sort of knew where the end line was. You knew where the finish line was. So it was kind of easy to say, okay, well, I know where I need to go. I'm just going to make that maneuver happen. And the nice thing is you didn't, like, you skipped some steps there, right? You didn't go single family, duplex, triplex, then multi-res commercial. And I think, like, how's that played out for you?
Well, I've been very happy. It's yeah, you definitely skip some of the, I mean, there's risk no matter what. So, in a sense, if you're going to be thinking anyway, you might as well think big. So there are risks no matter what you do. You work to manage those risks no matter what you do. So at least grab a deal where there's significant enough upside. I remember, truthfully, I don't recall exactly what the cash flow was like on that first building, but I remember I think I thought, if this doesn't make me $1,000 a month, what am I doing?
Yep.
So had to make some money, right? One thing we could dive into a little more deeply, especially since we don't want to spend too much time on the ins and outs of real estate, is some of the other things I did before transitioning as well. So
Yeah,
there were a
let's
number
definitely
of
talk about
side gigs.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think actually the very first business I had, I still worked at Wendy's when I was working on it. I tried my hand at, it's an exaggeration to say software development, but I basically would make aftermarket, if that's the term. I would make after purchase items for The Sims, back when The Sims video game was quite popular. And I sold subscriptions on a website. That was my first attempt. And I started charging for it just as I turned 18 and was old enough to sign up for PayPal in order to receive that money back through to the bank. So that was the first thing I did. And then after that, when I was able to quit my job and I was working with that MLM, I learned a lot about business. And I noticed, like, I felt privileged at the time because I was working with people who were older and more successful than me. But I think I learned a lot of business lessons early that my peers, especially at that time, most of my peers were attending university or college. And so I think I learned a lot of lessons early on that maybe other people didn't. Lessons in professionalism, in salesmanship, in just sticking to your pitch and not giving up. If someone says no, who cares? Move on to the next one. And so, there are some people, maybe you'll interview some of them at some point, but there are some people who came right out of the gate and started, real estate or not, started jumping into successful assets or successful investments when they were, 18, right? And so I worked at Wendy's when I was 18, quit when I was 19, this MLM when I was 19 and 20, and tried to pivot my business when that didn't work out. And as I'm turning 21, turning 22, I still didn't really have my legs under me. And so So some of these other lessons I learned before I had a successful strategy that basically allowed me to kind of stay the course and then just kind of strike on that first building, strike on that deal, knowing that it was the right deal.
It's fascinating, right? Because typically I think that you were paying a different type of tuition. So I guess the question would be then, what did it cost? So when you
That's a
were
great question.
transitioning, right? You're transitioning from, presumably high school, you would have finished high school, and then you're sort of getting into where most of your friends are going to go to school, quite like I think what's still the circumstances socially. And like I think all my friends went to school of some kind.
Mhm.
And you're there, doing this MLM, which right away has a stigma. And then number two, most likely this short stint would have led to a couple of haters getting a bit of a voice after that, right? Because they got to say, oh, you did it, but you only did it for so long and whatever. And then you try out these video game things. So what was the cost here?
Yeah, tough to quantify. I mean, I think it was necessary. I think it was worth it. In terms of total cost, I mean, I was always concerned about going to college, university, because I felt that it could be a way to basically burn 3 or 4 years. And then in hindsight, education takes time, whether it's sanctioned or whether you're single-handedly responsible for your own education, it still takes time. So I don't think I was able to skip the line or skip the time if that was a cost I was hoping to save. I didn't have student debt, which was nice. And then indebtedness that I accumulated, perhaps related to the purchase of my house. I think I did have some debt related to the business. And I was able to kind of clear that off as I bought my house. But, I, I don't know if the debt, when it's at a worse rate, when it's not government sponsored student debt, maybe that has a higher cost. But I don't know. I mean, it's hard to give a straight answer on exactly what the cost was compared to other options, but the
Did you lose
rewards.
friends socially? Was this socially frictional for you?
That's a great question. Um, Not precisely frictional, but I did confuse everybody. So
Yeah, I've been there.
yeah. So
That's
so
awesome.
they wished me well. They just had no idea what was going on.
Yeah. What was it like with your family and stuff? Did they understand and support you, or was this more of a gamble to them?
My mother was reasonably supportive. There are a few watershed moments that I can think back to. Years before that, when I was perhaps a younger teenager, I remember when my mom made a declaration that she felt she was no longer in a position to help me with homework. She's like, you know what, you're on your own now. Your education is your thing. This is not my math anymore. And so I think in the
Yeah.
same way, when I started to have revenue, and not going to say when I started to do well in business, but when I started to engage in business, when I started to have some momentum in business, she did everything she could to support that momentum because she felt that it was kind of my wheelhouse, my thing to either succeed on or fail on. So she was supportive. I remember right as I was going to quit my job at Wendy's, I had an aunt come to visit from far away, from Europe, and she hated that I was going to quit my job.
Really?
So I actually think about her every couple of months, even to this day. She was so sure that I was not going to do well and that I did not need to upset the apple cart. And oh man, if I listened to her, it would have been a painful outcome.
And have you had her over to dinner in your current home, John?
Unfortunately, I haven't. Again, she lives across the pond, quite far away, so I
Too bad.
haven't. But I should demand a Zoom call or something.
If she subscribes to the podcast, she will get a excellent visual representation. I don't think this shows really the grandiose scale of the room you're in, but that is one epic house. So
Thank you.
I would think materialistically, at the very least, you've significantly outperformed whatever her expectations were.
I hope so. I think so. And at that point, our expectations were that I needed to stay at Wendy's. So
Right.
that
Yeah, that's definitely a different game. Um, what kept you going? So there's an interesting thing here, right? And it's a pattern that I'm starting to notice the more people I interview. But there's this thing where, everybody that I've talked to started from almost nothing. And not necessarily like real poverty or anything, but like starting at a Wendy's or starting in a basic blue collar job, right? A low paying minimum wage style job or a business. And quite often what I see is they transition into ownership or entrepreneurship, and there's a bunch of failures in a row, but everybody keeps going. And I don't know if it's just because I only interview successful people on this podcast, and maybe that's like inherently a quality, but like what kept you going?
So it's an important question. There are different answers as time goes on. And I think if you're going to live through the decades and have a long and successful life, I think you're going to need to chain some of these separate notions together. I think that you're not going to be motivated in your later years by precisely what motivated you in your younger years.
Yeah.
So it's not going to work unless you have a multi-phase plan. So we talked earlier about Wendy's, right? I think my motivations at that time in my life were quite clear. I needed to get out of Wendy's. I needed to demonstrate that I was successful. And after that, it was about growing influence, growing in my community, showing other people that I could do it. Definitely has a materialistic component, but I think that you can even go back a lot farther than that. One thing I don't talk about much, I don't know why, I actually enjoy talking about it, but I had a very, very basic upbringing. And there are a few stats that there are a few little factoids that I don't state too often because even though they're 100% true, they almost sound exaggerated. So little things like right when I was born, we didn't have running water. We kind of worked that out after I was born. And so I don't remember this because I was a couple months old, but there are some awkward times in our family. One time we didn't have electricity to our house, so we ran the house off a car battery.
That's sick.
Oh yeah, I should create a list of these, but see, it sounds more dramatic than it is because the fact is that I was still born in Canada and I was always safe, right? I always had health care, of course, government health care in this country. So I don't want to make it sound like I was in a third world country, but I really was raised, in quite basic circumstances. And what I would do is act like I wasn't, even as an 8-year-old kid. We had these two terrible, miserable vehicles. There's no way they were roadworthy even. And what would happen was they would break constantly. And my mother's strategy was, well, at least we have two, one's in the shop, one runs.
Oh.
And as a kid, I thought, we're doing well. We have two cars. So poverty? What poverty? Financial limitations? I don't see any. I remember one time, the church took it upon itself to deliver groceries to our house for Christmas. And my mom didn't know anything of this. They just showed up. And she was angry because she felt that we weren't a charity case. And even though they were just trying to bless us and help us out, and they were quite sure we needed it, she didn't want to take it. And again, I didn't view it that way at all as a kid. I didn't think like, oh, we're a charity case or, oh, we're in need of help. I thought, this is great. I'm used to off-brand food, off-brand craft dinner or whatever it was. And these guys brought over all the best brands. It's just someone just, rewarding me, just treating me well, giving me a gift because it's Christmas. Again, none of those like negative, perhaps demotivating or discriminatory feelings that one could have in the situation. I just decided not to feel them. And it made, in subsequent years, as I grew up, it made the grind quite a bit easier. Just, poverty, what poverty?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that we talk about this quite a bit within our company and within, with my mentor, Matt McKeever here. We talk quite a bit about an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset, right? Because the scarcity mindset is really going to have a hard time getting over the pride element there and getting over the element that they're feeling a bit disenfranchised and feeling taken by the world. And when you're living in abundance, it is really easy to see the gifts and it is really easy to see the positives in any situation, right? So that's actually really fascinating. That's a cool story, man. The other thing I was just thinking there, you had two cars, which meant you had two car batteries at least. So you could take one off, jump the other car, then drive it, and the alternator would charge it. That is potentially a closed loop circuit that we could sell to Tesla. That sounds amazing.
That's amazing. Yeah, this was back in the day before batteries were particularly effective for this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be off the car battery. I think you need a different type of battery. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. Um, yeah, that's something I didn't know about you. But I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to ask, what are you driving today?
So I daily drive a Mercedes S550, and I know why you asked. I now have a Rolls Royce Phantom as well.
Those words coming out of your mouth, how does that feel?
It feels great. It's, in a sense, maybe the answer that the viewers would expect from me is, oh, it's too good to be true, or I can't believe it's finally me. The truth is, since I don't know, since I was 18, I always wanted one. I remember I'd actually dream about them. I would dream that I obtained the car and then wake up and go, damn it, I didn't obtain the car. I must keep working to get the car now. So in a sense, it seems too good to be true, and I can't believe it's me. In another sense, I always expected it would be. So it's nice that I checked off the box that I spent so much of my life thinking and hoping that I would be able to check.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm a firm believer in rewarding yourself, especially when you have put in the work. I think that's something some people can miss a lot because there's a lot of hype on the internet. There's a lot of people that just want to create noise and make it seem as if everybody can have a Rolls Royce or a Lamborghini or a mansion or whatever material it is out there. I believe that that's not the case. I think that most people are average, and it's the above average people that are going to succeed in life and have whatever it is that they want. I do love the material things as little benchmarks and sprints that I can do to get to them. Is that sort of how your mind works on these things? Like, once you get the Phantom, once you've got the house, what's going to keep you in the game? Like, what's going to just stop you now from saying, you know what, I've actually got enough? Is
That's
there
a great question.
enough?
Of course. So I think it becomes clear over time. And again, as you hit these benchmarks, you do have to stop and reevaluate. So right after we moved into this house, I purposefully did, I don't know how long the time period was, a month, a couple of weeks. I acknowledged that this was a benchmark and that it was a pause, and that I was going to take a pause and I was going to reevaluate. Because again, you can't run in precisely the same direction with no edits for your entire life. So I did stop and say, okay, I've done this. Maybe this is a chapter complete. So what does the beginning of the next chapter look like? And again, not to speak in generalities, but it is an evolution. So as you check off the boxes, though, you are freed up to focus on other things that you had a certain degree of focus on anyway. I think Robert Herjavec said once that money just gives you the freedom to be who you really are. And whoever you want to be or you try to be, it's actually perhaps a lack of money that stifles that. So you're kind of allowed to be more of what you were hoping to be anyway, or what you truly are anyway. So part of the reason that I was building this portfolio was because I wanted to have an influence in the community in which I was building. And so you can see how maybe not having certain material possessions or not being able to meet certain financial goals would inhibit that. And so when it gets those possessions and meets those goals, then it's almost like a weight lifted. So now your purity of purpose increases, and you can go and do what you were doing anyway without the limitations and the doubt and the lack of a track record holding you back.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic way to look at it, right? Because like that's really looking at putting your own mask on first, right? And then once you're able to do that, once you've got your mask on, you can then support whatever it is next that you care about. When I don't know, I'm in a weird spot in my career and in my trajectory right now where I am almost solely motivated by the material things. Like as soon as I got my Rolex, I put a Porsche on my phone's lock screen, like immediately. Now, it actually is still there, but I thought I'd switch it to the podcast. But anyways, for any of you watching at home, there's my Porsche. It's black. It's absolutely stunning. And you know what? I'm going to have it. And so I expect that I'll have it. It's just going to be a thing in my life, and I will eventually have it. But I can already tell, like when I open my screen, this is the other problem I've got. So when I open my screen now, it's kind of hard to see because there's so many icons, but what's there on my background? Oh, another Rolex. So for me, it's like, I don't know if I have enough. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where that button exists. Like, I'm poking in to the darkness. I'm trying to wade my way through, and I just can't seem to find enough. And I don't know if that's going to end up holding me back, or if that's going to end up being more like a reflection later on in life, where I can be more like in your position, where I do generally have those big buckets checked. And then at that point you reflect and sort of refocus. I'm not chasing God or anything else, so I don't have any big spiritual connection or spiritual anchor that I find a lot of the people that I talk to have. I guess it's almost like 50-50. There's like 50% people that anchor themselves to some sort of spiritual motivation. And then the other 50% are more like what I think I'm hearing from you, which is more of just simply a, like, let's do the right thing type perspective. And then like charitable, there's actually a word for this and I just can't think of it right now, but you know, like the idea that you just want to give back and be charitable in general, or contribute back to society or your specific neighborhood. I think that's a fascinating idea, but right now I can't put my finger on what it would be that I want to do. So,
well, I understand. I can speak to that a little bit. First of all, I'm loving this conversation. I think that this is the topic that a lot of people are afraid to cover.
yeah,
This is years ago, like, you know, I would watch this myself today. I'd be very interested in this, but especially years ago, I was dying to hear more of this discussion. And I couldn't find it. People don't want to talk about that. I think that acknowledging a certain desire, even a significant or overwhelming desire for material possessions, is important to do. It's certainly better than acting like that's not what's going on when that's clearly what's going on.
yeah,
I think a lot of people are, if they don't feel it, I think, what is that word? There's cognitive dissonance going on, where
yeah,
they're engaging in behavior that their parents told them that maybe wasn't something that should be approved of. And so they're just, they're feeling a way that they're not sure is okay to feel. But I mean, it's, signs also don't indicate that it's the wrong way to feel, right? So they're just unsure. So I think you've got to acknowledge the fact that people need stuff, people want stuff, and that it's about leveling up, and it's about spending more money and accumulating things that add value to your life and that you care about. I think acting like you don't need that stuff is unnecessary, and it's almost a form of self-harm. You've got to acknowledge what you want and what you need and what you're trying to do. And if that's a very expensive car or a very expensive watch, that's fine. That's what you like. It's what you want. So I don't think anybody should be apologizing for feeling that way. And I think that people who are tempted to apologize for it, just keep it in private. Beyond that, yeah, it's
true. Honestly, though, I don't need that fucking negativity in my life. Right? Like, when people are being very conservative and when they're thinking small, which is what it is, in my opinion. I mean, you've got all this time. And for the most part, I find a lot of people, when they're telling me that they don't want these things, if I just take a moment and ask them to break out their calendar or their daily activities for me, I can find like 8,000 ways where there's waste being applied, and like 8,000 ways where a more efficient schedule or a more effective strategy in terms of achieving their goals would most likely bring their mindset up to a point where they want to improve greatly on the actual finish line, on the actual end result of what they're trying to do. But I totally get it, because they're like 100% influenced by their family, their friends, everybody that's been around them for their entire life, right? I mean, I remember my grandparents, I remembered various times where they were like shitting themselves because I was out buying the sports car, or I was going to go to school after traveling. You know, I did like 17 countries before I went to school, which meant I had $0 when I was getting into my 4-year degree, which means obviously a bunch of school debt. And then I did the thing every privileged Canadian does, and I went, hey, Bank of Mom and Dad, can I get a cosigner? Can I get, you know, something here? Because I want to go to school. And luckily I did it in the right order, because had I gone to school first and then tried to travel and borrowed on a cosign on that end, that would have never happened. So I did it right unknowingly. But reflecting back on it, like it was really difficult for them to wrap their heads around. And there's a lot of social pressure there, right? What do you mean you're going traveling? What do you mean you're not working, or like you're going to take more work off? What do you mean you're going to start a business when you've got potential other career paths, right? And I think there's a lot of that pressure. And I think that it is refreshing, even talking to the people that have been on this podcast, to celebrate wealth, right? Celebrate these things that we want to get, because like, honestly, what's the point of anything? Why do we do anything? Well, it's because it gives us satisfaction, or it gives us something, right?
Exactly.
I guess my biggest question still remains though, is like, when we feel it's almost like an addiction. So when you don't have it, when we don't have progress as entrepreneurs, I find we get like this a lot. And I know a lot of people in this circumstance where, like, if you're not winning, we feel like we're losing, right? And winning usually looks, for a lot of the people I know, like forward momentum. So those pauses, I think, can often get shorter and shorter each time, where you're like, you got the big house, now it's a month of reflection. But now it's like, oh my God, I gotta go win.
Exactly.
So I'm wondering what that's doing to our long-term health. And I can't help but think that it's actually a benefit. Because like,
well, I agree. I think it's definitely a benefit. I think it's dangerous when you don't question everything. I think it's healthy to question everything. And you mentioned earlier how, you kind of scared your grandparents. So that's because there are certain things that are holy to them that they don't really want to question. And there's nothing wrong with looking at your ideals and your actions and your plans and making sure that they all work for you. A lot of people have a hard time understanding my, car spending, house spending, and so on. And they get even more confused when I tell them that I'm value first and value focused. They think there's a conspicuous lack of value, that it's all conspicuous consumption. But the truth is that everything I do has value. And I couldn't live with myself if I was making what I perceive to be a bad decision or a decision without value. And, you said that some of these people, you look at their calendars and you see that there are so many holes and there's just a lack of efficiency. But what I'm about is what works for me in a value first, efficient way. There are people who will criticize certain, conspicuous purchases or, certain luxury goods, but then they will give substantial funds to a charity with no due diligence. Why would you do that? It's not efficient. So I think it's best to question everything and just, as you go, just make sure that you're happy with your conduct and your behavior. And I think that some of these things work themselves out over time once you get comfortable with your process for passing and failing the various things you're going to do.
Yeah, I really like that. We like to take a first principles approach here, which is like, literally, why do we do anything? Like, okay, we make offers to buy properties that we can, or to get properties under control so that we can assign that deal and make money there. Why do we make offers, right? Is that something we need to do? Okay, it turns out you actually do need to make an offer to get further in the sales process. Okay, well, after we do that, we send out and we get an offer accepted. We send out emails, we send out all these different things. And then looking at each one of those tasks on a monthly basis, we like to do an end of month catch up and really look at, like, first principles. Did this activity make any impact on our goals? If not, kill it, right? And I think too many people are afraid to kill their babies here, because like there's a lot of times when you've got these ideas that maybe you came up with, maybe your mentor came up with it, it sounded like a great thing at the time, but when you go back and look at it, it doesn't actually make sense for the business as it stands today. So what we usually do is we just take it off of today's process map and put it into the save for later bin, right? The graveyard that we can resurrect at any time. But it's fascinating that more people don't do this. I think there's a lot of people, particularly the ones that you and I might consider to be the average people. I think what they do is, for the most part, they follow a very strict routine of the same things every day without truly being conscious of what they're doing. Why is it that you spend your time like that in the evening? Why is it that you wake up at that time in the morning? What do you do when you wake up, and why do you do that? Right? Is it like at home, you get home from work, you watch TV, you flip the TV on, and all of a sudden you're involved in your show, and then you're 4 episodes deep, and then all of a sudden you're snacking, you're eating crazy shit, and then all of a sudden you're wondering why you're fat, and you're like, God damn it, this sucks. And then life sucks. And then you can't get out of the rut, and you don't make that one decision, that one good decision that leads to the next, that leads to you being healthy and happy and productive. So
Well,
I think that
I've heard that referred to as the feedback loop from hell. So you do something bad, then you get upset that you did something bad. Now you're upset that you did something bad, and now you're feeling guilty about being upset that you did something bad. And then down the rabbit hole you go.
Yeah, that's brutal. So what I like to do is, right, just make one good decision. Like last night, we ate a pizza, a pepperoni pizza at like 11 p.m. Okay, my bedtime is 10. And here I am, and I should be fasting at like 6 or 7. And here I am eating this pizza at 10, and I'm like, oh my God. But then I also woke up at 6 o'clock this morning, got some reading in, and then did a workout at 7 with the team. So it's like, you know what? All of a sudden, the pizza's not that bad. And I think that making that good decision to wake up early, because I also went to bed late, was like the first step in having a great day today.
Right.
So it's kind of cool. Well, that's really interesting. So I'm kind of wondering then, Jon, what's next for you? What's your why today? Because obviously you've had some time to reflect. If we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm pretty sure you got the basics covered with the Phantom and the mansion. What's next, dude?
Well, it's the question I'm always asking. And I also have a habit of not that I wish to hold back, but I do have a habit of not going into significant detail until I'm done. So as I was Phantom shopping, nobody knew about it. And I think everyone kind of saw when I put the one Instagram post on, and that was it. There was an indication like 18 months earlier, I went to see one Phantom one time. And so if people were watching that day,
we remember.
Yeah. But I don't. So here's another philosophy, I suppose, not to go too deep into it, but if people announce what they wish to do or they're about to do before they do it, it's actually because they crave the endorphin high from that. So
right.
Why do you want to close on the deal? Because it's going to feel great. Well, I don't want to feel great on closing day. I want to feel great this afternoon. Well, let me just send out this deal I'm about to do to my friends, and then I'll get some of that endorphin today. So So speaking in more, are we still good for our internet connection, Adam?
Yeah, if you're good, I paused it for a second while I lost you.
Okay.
But I think I've got you back now. I mean, you're a frozen face, but I got your audio pretty good, so we're good to rock and roll.
Okay, am I a little frozen?
Oh, yeah. Oh, we got you back. Boom, Jon Kepler in the house.
All right. I'm back. There we go. Okay. Hopefully we caught most of that. Generally speaking, in terms of shifting gears and going to a new place from here, it's a chance to perhaps focus a little less on material possessions. I'm good for a while, and just focus more on why I started in the first place. Beyond getting that initial freedom and ensuring that financially I was so far beyond Wendy's that I would never need to go back to Wendy's.
Yeah.
It is still, some of the same rules apply. So it's still about influencing the community. It's still about making things better. I also like to take a good hard look at how my peers currently are investing and how they're operating and running their businesses. But also, and again, not to touch too much on real estate, but looking at the assets that we own or the community in which we own the assets, and consider how they used to be managed. So how, before I was a participant, how did this roll, 20 years ago with some of the people who've since moved on and retired, and how am I doing in comparison to them? So I get a lot of satisfaction and I get to feel good about my self-worth when that is scaling up. So I think a lot of people are proud in a way to participate in a society where almost everybody can afford a television, and there are certain creature comforts that used to be luxuries that are now mandatory or easily obtained. At one point in society, food was scarce. Now, fast food is affordable for the masses. Yep. And so I look at what I'm creating in my business. I look at the service, frankly, the product and the service that we're providing to the end users. And I just get a lot of gratification in terms of that scaling up in desirability over the decades, and just taking something that didn't used to be that great, maybe in the 60s or the 80s, it was a dump, and just moving it forward into something that is obviously profitable for me, but is really good overall, and just building something that I'm really happy that I spent my time building.
Yeah, I mean, that is often overlooked when we look at the evil landlords that we are. And and I think a lot of people do overlook that we are truly providing a significantly improved product when you're following the investing strategies that we often talk about, which is the idea that we are going to get assets that are in typically some form of disrepair or otherwise underperforming assets. We're going to improve them, which literally improves the quality of life for anybody that interacts with them. And I would say, I mean, I don't know the full numbers, but I assume you've got a lot of doors. So I don't know if you even have a head count on them anymore, but like you've got a lot of people getting the benefit of your service of having a nice shelter, right? And you're improving them constantly so that you can get that good refi and pull your money back out. So everybody's really incentivized in this game to do that.
And there are always going to be haters regardless, but when you're considering that, it's so funny. Whenever someone has a problem with what someone else is doing, or someone else's unreasonable expectations I'm not conforming with, no one wants to ask, how did the last guy do, and what sort of trajectory is happening long term. I mean, the fact is that everything is getting very much improved. Everyone's getting a lot more value than they used to. They're actually, people always look at rent prices increasing. The truth is the value is increasing substantially. When you consider the fact that the value of a dollar is decreasing substantially, the value is even more prevalent. So it's people, whenever people get negative or they say that they don't like certain things that are taking place, they're really not asking the right questions, or even just truthfully looking at what is going on long term.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful, because it's very easy to listen to whatever the current news cycle is and whatever the current headline is that, some landlord did this or that, or all of a sudden people have bills that they can't pay. And people get frustrated with this type of thing, but they're certainly not asking what was the quality of life like and what was the history of that product. So I think that's actually a really great way to look at this, and a really interesting motivator too, because if that is your end game, then you are going to consistently be improving your assets and your holdings, which I think is a great idea.
There is a YouTube video. Whenever I need a boost, I look up this video. It's with a fund manager named Howard Lutnick. And so it's just, I think it's maybe 6 minutes or so. Oh, I'm getting that internet notice again. I hope I'm okay here. But
yeah, your video's been a little crazy for the last couple minutes, but your audio's been decent, so.
Okay, perfect. So there's this hedge fund manager named Howard Lutnick, and there's an interview perhaps about 6 minutes long where this long-term media personality that they've known each other for a while. I get the idea that they might be friends, but he's interviewed by this media personality. And I forget exactly what was going on in the world at that time, because it's probably a 2 or 3 year old interview at this point. But of course they tune in, they introduce themselves, and they say, Howard, how's the world going? And he said, great, I'm so excited. And they said, what do you mean? What about this recent challenge or that recent challenge? He said, challenge? Have you looked at how things are going? Like decade over decade, like world poverty is through the floor. Like so many developing countries are actually providing people the basic needs of life when they never used to. And basically I'm not going to do a great job delivering his enthusiasm and some of the points that he made, but they just kept throwing like negative questions his way, and he just said no. The answer is no. No. And they said, are you pulling back on your investments? He's like, no. Like, are you kidding? Like, I'm positive, therefore I'm going to be positive about the plays we're making. And he just wouldn't be thrown off. He said, the fact is the world is a rapidly improving place. Is everything great? No, but everything's a lot more great than it used to be. And in the future, long term, we expect nothing but more of the same.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic approach. And I really don't see that we have any other, I don't think we really have any reason to suspect otherwise, right? I mean, at moments in time, there are challenges, like in the 90s where interest rates go crazy, or 80s. We've got challenges like 2008. We've got challenges like this current pandemic. But I think that when we look at the longer term, like how we should all be, in my opinion, looking at these types of things, is like, we're going to be okay. Obviously, there's people that are currently engaged in some serious struggles, but I think that this is also a great time to reflect on, again, going back to the first principles approach, why do I do anything that I do, and how is it serving me? And I think that when we start thinking like that, it's really easy to see how we can weather these storms and refocus and reframe our businesses to be more successful. And I think, like, we look at our other business, Cash Flow Tribe, like online it's a fantastic approach. It's a great way to do it because people have socially shifted more towards this Zoom culture, this culture that's more accepting of doing meetings in this way. I still believe in face-to-face. I think that's probably the best way you can do this, but it's really fascinating. Like if you're agile, if you're maintaining a first principles approach with your business, you can often make these pivots that do allow you to not only stay in the game, but potentially gain a competitive advantage, which I think is awesome. And I think that's probably a big part of how we see the products from the past and in history getting significantly improved and improving the quality of life for everybody involved, right? Like online advertising of your units. Well, now people are actually aware of what's out there, so they can vote with their dollar and get your better unit versus the older guy or whoever's been in the game for such a long time that they're not improving their units, or even just slummy landlords or slummy business owners. It's so easy for us to share information now that truly everybody's quality of life goes up just by virtue of choice, right? You get to decide. So that's fascinating. Interesting discussion here.
Yeah, and anytime you go through something that, well, I mean, COVID-19 is the topic of the topic
Of the day,
year,
the
topic
minute.
of the decade. I'm not sure, but it's merely a chance for society as a whole to obtain a skill set that they haven't quite obtained. I hesitate to call this comical, but it is interesting that when various people were trying to wrap their heads around COVID-19, how far they had to look back. People would talk about 1918, I think. They would just go way, way back. And so that indicated to me, and this wasn't discussed generally in the media for some reason, what that indicated to me was that we had a severe lack of familiarity and skill and momentum in terms of dealing with this at all. I mean, we didn't talk about a pandemic from 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We had to go all the way back then. So this is the opportunity for us to develop those skills. And of course, we're much more connected in terms of the internet and data sharing and so on than we were, definitely than we were 20 or 30 years ago even. And so there's just, there's quite an opportunity for society to get their legs under them, to become competent in terms of dealing with this stuff so that, and I know everyone's kind of life might have flashed before their eyes for a second when this first happened, but it's a chance for people to understand that we are now getting comfortable operating this way, and that as a whole, we're going to develop the skills, develop the processes, and then next time it's not that big a deal, and it makes the economy more stable. It makes us all more stable.
Yeah, I mean, and hopefully too, it's a good wake-up call for our governments and the bigger systems that surround us and do influence us, that they need to be more agile. I mean, the response time on everything they're doing, in my opinion, is absolutely heinous. I think like the fact that we're still in some sort of large lockdown and that there's not optional quarantining where you can keep the at-risk or highly at-risk people at home and allow the other people to remain productive is a really fascinating decision that's extremely reflective of how the government is generally run. It'd be interesting to see what would happen if this was a blue government, just to see like how this would be rolled out. Because, I mean, to me, I'm seeing a lot of people, there are going to simply be people that aren't able to adapt because of the actual restrictions being placed on them. And it's a really fascinating time to really evaluate your business strategies, your business processes, and as well as like take a good look at your environment. And I know there's a lot of people that have been considering moving their environment, right, to areas that are less restrictive, areas that allow for more freedom of decision and agility. And I think that that's probably not a bad call.
Well, fortunately, in terms of how I run my business, I almost pre-planned for COVID without realizing it. In terms of being in contact with our team virtually as opposed to face-to-face,
Yep.
I used to live right in the middle of our investments. I could walk to all of our buildings if I had a whole afternoon to walk around to them all. And now I live hours away from our assets, and it's all virtual. And it's not even much over the phone. It's all text and email and other forms of software, like our productivity software. And so just a lot of work even through the cell phone, right? Most of what I do now is can sync to my phone rather than just a desktop or a laptop computer. So I already made some of these changes, and then as it turns out, I was pretty well positioned. But I was concerned that I would get some pushback from my team or from the public at large. And I did get some pushback from my team, certain members of my team when I went a little more remote. But now society approves of it and understands it, and they're working to wrap their heads around it even more. So it's interesting. I think it's a trend that's going to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that as well. Hey, this just actually brought up an interesting question in my mind. How did you select your team? Because obviously, like, again, you are hours away, and I think a lot of people that listen to this are entrepreneurs. I run into this challenge all the time as well as we try and grow our teams. But yeah, how did you find your people?
Well, it's not an exact science, and it's not always smooth. It doesn't always work. But generally speaking, I will begin working with someone in a certain capacity. It's a limited capacity. So if they're going to be a problem right away, the size of the problems that they create will be relatively small. And then I just roll out more responsibility to people as I trust them and as they're willing to take it on. So they get to earn more money, spend more hours with us, and generally take honestly, generally work on higher value projects as well. So the people who've worked with us longer, they get to work not just on maybe the fun stuff, but they get to really move the needle forward in terms of our business, and they get to feel good about the projects that they've successfully managed. Because it's about more than money, right? We're all working to accomplish things. And so, again, it's not an exact science, but generally we start off with a small role, kind of give people more. And if they turn out to be a good fit for our business, then it's beneficial for everybody. I don't want to give a universally positive answer either, or just say, oh, we figured it out, or, oh, it's fine, it's worked for us. In my past, there was one person that I gave a lot of responsibility to, and it didn't explode. It worked quite well for a while, and it didn't ultimately hurt me or screw me in the end. But I just wasn't able to sustain the loyalty. I guess I thought they'd be a lot more loyal than they would be, or I thought that I could kind of work with them one-on-one to work through any hesitation they had about continuing to stay on with us for years and years. And I just wasn't able to. So I lost that person. And it wasn't just someone who could be replaced with a new hire. So it changed the structure of what we did. So that person had so many varying roles that I could not just hire one more person to take on the same varying roles. I had to, it's basically piecemeal. I had to get a number of small contractors to kind of come in bit by bit and replace the one guy. So, I mean, that was, I guess, less than enjoyable, but you have to take the good with the bad.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's always interesting when I think about what level of redundancy we have built into our businesses. And I do find that that's one of the fragile elements that I see in our business, actually, is there's not enough. There's not enough redundancy by any stretch of the imagination. And a few key players represent it's kind of like a Pareto's law again, which it always is, of course, but 20% of our staff make up 80% of our results and responsibilities and everything. So it's one of those interesting challenges that I think a lot of business owners face. And yeah, I really wonder, I don't know who has the answers for these things. I don't know that it's going to be our real estate investing circle, but somebody has the answers for how you deal with attrition, how you would deal with, work life. I don't want to say work-life balance because that's just a stupid fucking term. But like, how do we keep people motivated and bought in to the extent that they'll go all in, right? Because I think that's a big challenge with a lot of new hires and people where we're trying to wrap our vision around them. They don't necessarily understand the scope of what we're trying to accomplish, and it's hard. It's just fucking hard work. And so I keep questioning everybody I have on this podcast. What motivates you? What is your why? How do you keep going? how do you keep your ego in check? What role does like ego play in your business? How do you get rid of that when you need to, roll up your sleeves and either do the work or roll up your sleeves and take a loss, right? Like whatever it is, like it's so fascinating. And so many people have really the same answer, which I'm not sure if this discussion will ever answer it, because I see this podcast as an ongoing discussion where if anybody should listen from 1 to 5 or 1 to 6 where we're on today, they should be able to participate in the conversation long form with me and all these different characters like yourself. But it's like, who the hell is going to have the answer? Because everybody that I've talked to is the same answer in terms of this stuff. Like, yeah, we basically just grind through it, and sometimes it's shitty and sometimes it's amazing. And I'm like, fuck. Okay.
Yeah, well, I can try my best to cover some new ground. Some of it is people who do it well also know intuitively how to do it, and asking those people to describe it step by step or describe it in English is not always something that they're going to be able to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I genuinely care about my team, but I know that other people care about their teams as well. I've found that in building genuine relationships with everybody I work with, you will have discussions about their personal life, and they will have discussions with you about your personal life. I think that stifling that is ridiculous. If you have someone you work with and you have no idea, you've never talked to them about their parents or what makes them tick or their larger feelings about the world. I know that politics and religion are two particularly sticky topics, and people can struggle with those, but you're a whole person, you're a multifaceted person, and you are working with other multifaceted people. And I think that you have to build a bond, and that's a hard to define, complicated mix of things. But number one is genuinely caring about them. And so that means if they have a personal problem and they choose to talk to you about it, don't be an asshole. Actually care about them and talk to them about it. And just try to be the person that you would have wanted. And beyond that, there are lots of intangible, hard to describe aspects that you just get better at with experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. That reminds me too of all the tacit knowledge in our company. Like there's so much that, and again, this comes back to the redundancy thing, but there is so much that like is just in my head, and that is such a bad place for it to be. Not only do we have really shitty hard drives as humans, but like, it's just like if I decide to leave, or if Matt decides to leave, or if somebody, key player decides to leave our company, like there's a lot of stuff we don't even know we don't know. So it's not a good thing, but I guess that's what it's all about, continuous improvement.
For sure. A problem in our business at one point was that I was hoarding it. And so,
that's a big thing.
The business would have had a problem if I went somewhere. Of course, it didn't have an immediate problem because it's my business. I stuck around. But it made other members of the team quite uncomfortable. And so at one point I begin documenting some of the things that only I knew, because it's unhealthy for them for different people to come to me and say, how do we do this when I shouldn't be hoarding information?
Yeah, no, and at what point in your career did you get to that point? Because I think that's one of the biggest fears that people have, particularly entrepreneur types, and let's call it high performing individuals. We have a real goddamn problem with giving away control. And
so at what point,
I agree.
Yeah. So at what point did I make a drastic change and start documenting this stuff? When I had a major problem, when things really hit the fan, and I made a cherished member of my team really mad for a really stupid reason. Basically just made their life hard, and there was no justification for it. And I thought, this is my fault because I haven't taken the steps to document. I've prevented them from having the right tools. I've prevented them from working through this on their own. And so, there was one watershed moment where I really upset somebody, and I cared a lot about them. And I thought, I can't have this again. I owe them a solution. So I will have to figure this out, and I will have to work through it until it is solved, because that's my obligation. And actually that worked quite well.
Yeah, I think that even our business probably doubled overnight the minute we started subscribing to the idea of taking ownership, right? Mm-hmm. Taking ownership that, hey, I'm being a shitty leader right now. I'm hoarding information. I'm giving bad instructions. I've let this failure happen. I've let this communication breakdown occur. I've not done enough to ensure that the people under me are understanding exactly what it is that I'm asking of them and why. Why does it matter? I think that's a big part of it. And I think once we're able to release that from our heads and actually convey that to staff, employees, friends, business partners, family members, I think that's when we actually become even more empowered. It's actually, you lose less control every time you take ownership and really just allow yourself to pass responsibility across. So yeah, it's fascinating, man. And as with everything, of course, I love that there was a major conflict catalyst. Like, we never change when we're killing it. It's like we always wait until there's something going wrong, but it's usually not even a fire. We wait for it to turn into like a forest fire. We see the spark and just hope it goes out.
Well, the problem with that, maybe it's not correct to call it a problem. To a certain extent, that is a good way forward. Statistically speaking, sometimes sparks extinguish themselves, and having an alarmist attitude over every spark will lead to guaranteed failure. So you kind of have to balance it. But yes, the problem is when you had the opportunity to extinguish the one spark that later became a blaze, and you just didn't, just because you didn't care, because you made an incorrect forecast. When we had that big problem, though, I thought, why haven't I solved this? How do I solve it? And like, how do I go about solving it? And how do I determine what needs to happen? Or like, do I need to buy a software solution, or what's, how do I even start my search? And then I realized that I already had the answer. I had the answer for 10 years. It was in the back of my head. I just forgot about it. I just stopped using it, right? Because why put in all the effort for one little menial or seemingly unimportant aspect of your business when it can be skipped? And so, it was sort of like a back to basics moment for me. The things that I learned early on in my business. We talked at the beginning of the podcast about some of the best practices and some of the things that I learned when I was 19 and 20. And so one of those was how to actually keep everyone organized and give people the tools they need. So just went back to that and kind of installed some solutions, and then it all worked. Yeah,
that's awesome. I think that's so fundamental. Is like, if we can keep our businesses simple enough that we can explain it to other people, number one, that's a bonus. Number two, if you can actually get that written down somewhere so that you're not hoarding all the information, that's a huge bonus, because that means there's transferable skill there and knowledge. And then finally, like, I think it's just so important that we get everybody on board. And one of the only ways to get everybody on board and moving towards a common goal is to tell them, what it is that we're working for, right? Like, why are we doing any of this? And quite often I see that people work too much in silos. They'll keep we can see this if we just look at real estate real quick. It's like, the plumber might do something before the electrician, and then the drywall maybe went in first too. And you're like, holy shit, like, there's an order of operations. But if you don't tell everybody what the plan is, how can you expect the plan to get executed? And I see this way too often from a business perspective as well. So, man, fascinating discussion today, John. I'm really happy you could make it on. I'm going to have to get running here, but this has been an awesome and stimulating conversation, and I hope that it was for anybody listening as well.
Of course.
I never leave without a smile when I talk to you. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Oh, that's nice. Right back at you for sure. Thank you very much. It's been a good one. I like that I took some time to talk about things that I don't always talk about or know how to bring up. But it's been great.
Yeah, awesome, man. So everybody, if you're not already following Jon Kepler, it's Jon Kepler. And you can find him on Instagram, and I think just about every platform has that. And you are in for a treat, because he knows how to show some serious wealth appreciation and celebration on that Instagram. So if you want to see some cool cars, some cool houses, and Mr. Wellington and the wonderful Alicia, you might find them both there. Yes. And once again, John, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And we got to do this more. We got to get together for some wine soon. Definitely. I think we're almost post-COVID, so at least it is at my house.
We're nearly there. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Wine with others instead of wine, just with your quarantine buddies, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. All right, John, I'm going to hit stop on this gosh darn recording, and then we can talk about all the real value add stuff while these guys are gone. All right. See you guys. It was a pleasure talking to you again. This has been Adam J.D. Martin, your host of Mic'd Up Millionaires. This was episode number 6 with Jon Kepler. And as is tradition, we're going to sign off with Kissy Face. I love it.